Welcome to Navigate Tuesday Tips. I'm Pam, and today we're going to talk about handling communication challenges. Some of the most common challenges that we have on our properties are differences in communication due to limited English proficiency or cultural challenges, disabilities or mental illness, personality differences, inexperience with a rental situation. We have some people that have never rented before or haven't rented in quite some time. Inexperience with subsidy programs. Past trauma or negative experiences sometimes can impact how someone sees a communication. Personal biases. Bad or inaccurate information can result in communication difficulties, and lack of education or communication skills. Things to keep in mind. When someone's moving into subsidized housing, it's coming with neighbors on all sides, which they may not have experienced. Sometimes a loss of independence or perceived loss of independence for seniors or the disabled. Lots of rules. A perceived loss of privacy. A lot of them are going from their own home to an apartment, and it can be a big change for people. It can be even more challenging to people who have mental disabilities or challenges or neurodiversity. One of the things that you can do to improve your communication is practice what's called active listening. Active listening has you focus on understanding what the person is saying rather than preparing a reply. Most of us in a conversation, as we're listening to someone, are kind of formulating our own ideas and responses. Active listening has you just focusing on understanding. So you're going to avoid interrupting, take notes or ask questions when the speaker is done, allow for pauses and silence. One of the things that you can do that helps people to know that you're listening is paraphrasing what was said. So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Or if I hear you correctly, you said that. Confirm that you're paying attention with things like, okay, I hear you, I understand. Be careful of what's called microaggressions. Microaggressions are sort of unconscious biases that we all have. We all grew up in different ways and, with different neighborhoods and different people and different religions and all sorts of things that frame how we see the world. So microaggressions can include things like your speech, your mannerisms, your tone, expressions that may have negative undertones, things like master bedroom or lame. Where it's reasonable, accommodate personal preferences for terms of address. Things like titles. If somebody has a doctor title, they may want to be addressed as doctor. Some of these titles reflect a big achievement for people, and they're more comfortable being referred to using those titles. Gender, be very careful about following gender preferences. The federal government recently has issued guidance on whether or not it recognizes genders. You want to follow what your corporate policy is in terms of how you address people. Follow any company expectations for how residents and others will be spoken to. One of the things that can help you foster open communication is avoiding a flat no when possible. A flat no shuts people down. It discourages communication. So if you can frame it as offering an alternative, sometimes that'll open discussion and it avoids it being heard as just a door slam. So if somebody says, oh man, I just saw, my friend has Newfoundland puppies. I love Newfoundlands. I'd love to have one. Can I have one here? You can, instead of just saying, no, you can't. You could say, well, there's a size limit here for pets, but you could have a dog that meets those. Maybe you could find a smaller dog that's similar to a Newfoundland that would meet the policy. So you can open up that dialogue by not directly saying, no, you can't, and kind of explaining the rules and sticking to the rules, but doing that in a way that allows for discussion and interaction. Remember that when you're talking about animals, service animals and ESAs do not have size or breed restrictions. Focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. So if somebody says to you, that manager was completely rude to me, I want them fired right now. What you can tell them instead of saying, well, we're not going to fire somebody just because you don't like what they said. That's going to shut it down. It could potentially make the person very agitated. But you can answer it in a way that allows the person to see you're taking it seriously, but it doesn't necessarily promise them a specific outcome. Our company takes this very seriously. I can't guarantee what's going to happen, but I can tell you we'll look into it and take the appropriate action. Or let me look into this and get back to you if you don't have an answer right now. Get them invested in the solution to the problem. So you can ask things like, well, what's your ideal solution to this? Or we could offer X or Y. Which would you prefer? Or in case I can't get that done for you in particular, is there an alternative you can think of? It helps the resident feel that they have some control in the discussion. It helps validate their concerns as important, and it gets them invested in the outcome. You want to give as much information as makes sense to do. You want to offer options where you can and get input. If you are redoing flooring, sometimes if there are two similar floorings, you can say, we can install A or B, which would you like? Or we can meet on Tuesday or Wednesday, which is better for you. Or you can have an interim for that new expense, or you can save it and have it added in next year. Offering these options can give your resident a feeling that you care what they think, which we do, and that they have some control over the outcome. We ask them to provide a lot of information. They have to follow a lot of rules. So sometimes it can feel like you have no control over the situation. And giving them options where you can helps them to understand that they do have some choices. Avoid too many choices, though, and certainly don't make promises you can't keep. Remember, with reasonable accommodations, there's a requirement to enter into what's called an interactive dialogue. So if you can't accommodate a particular solution, you always want to be approaching that in terms of, we can't do this, but we could do this. So let's say Mrs. Smith has asked for very expensive Italian marble flooring instead of carpeting. Verification does confirm that she needs non-carpeting. Now, the property normally uses VCT instead of marble. So what we would be doing is confirming with the verifier that the VCT meets the need, and then having a meeting with Mrs. Smith to say, well, Mrs. Smith, we were able to confirm that you need your carpet removed. We are not able to install marble, but we could install this VCT that looks like marble if that will work. And the hope is that you'll come to an acceptable solution. If she's being unreasonable, you want to look for guidance from your supervisor. But if she accepts that solution, then you've been able to come to a solution without a hard no. If you've heard of the concepts of do no harm or do unto others, you want to strive in your interactions with people to leave them feeling better than when they walked in. Somebody walks into my office and is yelling and angry. My goal is to have them leave feeling like I've heard them and hopefully to have a solution. Even if you can't give the desired solution, you want to aim for people to feel heard, respected, and understanding what the next steps are. Never underestimate the value of a simple, I'm sorry. Even if it's not something that you did, even if it's not something that's your fault, offering empathy and an apology sometimes goes a long way to make people feel that they've been heard and understood. I'm sorry that our discussion left you feeling disrespected. I'm sorry if I caused you to feel disrespected. I can hear that you're frustrated. I'm sorry that that's the result of any interactions with us, but keep legal ramifications in mind. So you don't want to admit to fault. Attorneys will tell you that. If there's any question on whether you can say something, direct those to your supervisor or to your attorney. Disabilities and impairments can sometimes drastically impact how someone communicates. Remember that we are not clinicians. We don't diagnose, we don't treat. When there appear to be more than the usual challenges, you want to be looking at offering alternate methods of communication. Some people don't do well with verbal communication, and they're going to do better if you put it in writing. Don't make promises that you may not be able to keep. That's generally true of any interaction. But with certain conditions, those things can be especially difficult for people to process. Be conscious of signs that an individual is feeling overwhelmed. You can always offer to regroup later without getting into why they may be feeling that. You can say, you look pretty upset. Would it be better to continue this at another time? Be sure to involve any conservators if there is a conservator. And if the tenant requests to have somebody else at the meeting, be sure to involve those parties where possible. Never imply that an individual is incompetent or has any sort of disorder or disability. Reasonable boundaries. Tough skin is an essential part of working with people, but reasonable boundaries are acceptable and should be set. For these, you're really going to look to what your company's policy is for how to deal with somebody who is yelling, swearing, accusing you. In some cases, you can say things like, I can tell you're very upset, but I am going to have to ask you to stop using profanity. Or in some cases, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the office and come back when we can have a reasonable conversation. Again, you're going to follow your corporate guidelines for how to handle that. It could include things like ending a phone call and asking them to call back later, asking someone to leave the office, doing your future communications in writing to avoid conflict, and whatever other solutions your company generally employs. Again, safety first. If somebody is getting agitated to the point that you are concerned for your safety, call law enforcement. If you ask them to leave and they're refusing, call law enforcement. Sometimes you can lock your door and call law enforcement. Sometimes you might need to leave the property and call law enforcement, but always follow your company's policy for what you should do in the case of an agitated resident that makes you feel unsafe. Goal is always a successful outcome, right? But that doesn't always mean everyone gets what they want. It means that everyone feels accepted and we've come to an acceptable solution, if maybe not the one they prefer. So that's going to do it for this one. I hope you found that helpful. If you have an idea for what you'd like to see on the next Tuesday tip, please let us know. You can email me or Vicki. You can also email us with questions, and we'll see you on the next one.